All right, how's everybody doing? This is our December meeting, December 13th, 2023. Admit. Okay, for all of you that just joined, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel. So, as we've been talking earlier, we've all been driving, all the districts are doing it. If anybody has any ideas for maybe getting some new drivers in, we can always share them here. Our last meeting was held on November 15th, 2023. Al Karam with Shenandoah Central School District presented on challenges that we all are going to face as we convert fleets to electric. And there was a lot of good information on that, right down to where's the power going to come from for all these electric buses. I know here at Shenandoah, he mentioned that we were going to be going from 2 megawatts of power, what we consume now, to 13 megawatts. And that's a lot. That's once we're fully electric. But, and then, who's eventually going to pay for it? He spoke about that, the needed infrastructure and the training for mechanics. There was a lot of information. So luckily, we're not going to go over it all here. It was recorded. You can go onto our channel and view that. There was 19 cameras on that particular video on that meeting, and it's had about 150 views since then. That was 3 weeks. So it's definitely being watched. People are obtaining the information from it, which is what this is all about. All right, so we've all had this happen when DEC shows up to inspect our fuel islands, and the inspector tells us of a new regulation that we didn't know about, or maybe one that they never mentioned. And today, we have Micki Jones with us from Capital Region BOCES, and she's going to help us get more prepared for the DEC fuel inspection. So different things that they're looking for, the newer regulations. And I know I spoke with Micki about this earlier, and we can all discuss it, how the meeting goes. Maybe we'll have more of these. So as things change and move on, we can stay right on top of it. That's the goal of this, is to keep all of our members up to date with the latest regulations that DEC is looking for. So that being said, Micki, the floor is yours.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dan. So welcome, everybody, and I'm happy to present to you guys today. If any time you've got questions, feel free to chime in. I'm going to give you some time for questions at the end. I'm also going to give you guys some time to share. If I haven't talked about anything and it's happened to you, it's a great time for us to share. I know there's been a lot of changeover with the head mechanics, and so any knowledge we can share helps everybody else out. So I'm going to start sharing my screen here. Hopefully everything works, because it worked yesterday, but we all know how that works. Are we good?
Yes.
Awesome.
Now you're going to want to present. We can see the sidebar.
Let's see.
We had this happen before.
How's that?
I'm
in present mode on my screen.
Okay, I mean we can see the rest of your slides on the side.
All right, let me see here. Slideshow. Is that any better?
No, I can still see the sidebar. I know Al had this issue in the beginning.
Yeah, we'll just go with it this way if you guys are okay with that.
Okay.
All right. So let's talk about preparing for an inspection. And so you're at your office and you receive the call, DEC will be here tomorrow. They don't often give us a lot of notice when they're showing up. If you're lucky, you may have 2-3 days. Most of the time it's just 24 hours. And they'll call you like mid-morning and say, we'll be there at 11 o'clock tomorrow. So the more we know ahead of time, the easier it will be. So are you ready? Let's talk about some of the things that they're going to look for. Some of the questions that I always get when I talk to different head mechanics and transportation directors is, why me? What did I do? Well, they have different types of inspections. So they've got programmed inspections, meaning that, hey, it's just your time. Typically, we are seeing inspectors out in the field about once every 3 years. If you've gone longer than that, congratulations. If you've not seen anybody yet, just know that it can happen. And once you do get that initial inspection, you can probably pretty much see them every 3 years. Other reasons why you're going to see them is you have a new facility. You did a tank removal and they want to come out and they want to check your paperwork. There's been a complaint or you've had a spill. Typically, we would see this if somebody is driving by and they see that you have fuel oil on the ground and they're calling in DEC to say, hey, do you know about this? And then lapsed registration, meaning that you forgot to renew on time. We'll talk about that in just a moment about what is your time cycle to renew your registration. So what regulations do I need to follow? Sometimes it becomes the alphabet soup. And when the inspector shows up, they just start rattling off these code citations and numbers. So it helps us if we know which parts of the regulation apply to us. So when the inspector shows up, they start talking about code 613. That is the bulk petroleum storage regulation. So one of the things that I've done in the presentation is I've actually linked the regulations. So anywhere that which you see something that's underlined, that'll actually be a link for you to take you directly to the regulation so that you can look at it in the future. So, and then what part of the regulation do I have to comply with? Subpart 2 talks about underground storage tanks that are associated with fueling.
Hey, Micki.
Yes.
Hey, are you still on your first slide?
I'm on my third slide.
Okay, we are seeing the first slide still, so it's not advancing.
All right, let's see what I can do here. Let me try to reshare my slides here. Maybe that will help. Share. All right, let me try one more. Of course, this is going to be an issue. Give me one moment. Because, of course, it worked yesterday, right?
Yeah.
All right. Get my window.
You're being graded on this and recorded.
Awesome. Isn't that fabulous? All right.
Okay, so we're back to where we were.
All right. Are you seeing any? Did the slide change at all now? To the center slide.
As you click those, yeah.
All right, we'll do it that way then. So as I said, this is going to give you the what regulation do I need to follow? So one of the other things that they talk about is what category of tank you are. So a category 1 tank is any tank that was installed before December 27th of 1986. A category 2 tank is a tank that was installed from December 27th of 1986 to October 11th of 2015. And a category 3 tank is any tank installed after October 11th of 2015. The reason why you kind of need to understand what category you fall in is because there are different rules that apply depending on when your tank was actually installed. Right. So registering the tanks. So it's every 5 years that they're supposed to be registered. Typically you do get something back in the mail. that says it's time for you to renew your tanks. You'll usually get that about 60 days before it's due. I want to warn you, though, that that is a courtesy. I have had this happen to districts where they didn't realize that their registration had lapsed, and all of a sudden DEC is at your door. Or worse yet, you get a certified letter in the mail from DEC that says, here's your fine. So we tried to fight that, and what they had said is sending you the renewal paperwork is a courtesy, and it is up to you as the property and tank owner to make sure that you stay up to date. So just a little warning on that. You also want to make sure that your most updated registration is also signed and that copy is posted. Where is it posted? It's supposed to be posted in the place where people who come into your facility will see it. So just having it in your office, depending on who your inspector is, they may get that picky that they say, hey, this is in your locked office and it's not in a spot where the general people coming in know that your tanks are registered. So just registering it once every 5 years, however, is not enough. You actually need to update your registration. If the material that you've stored has changed, I know some people are flopping back and forth between gas and diesel in their tanks. If you've had a new tank and you've added storage, depending on if you've increased your storage capacity, you may need to pay an additional fee. Typically, they don't charge for registration updates. Here's the important one. Contacts have changed. So as people retire, as people leave, making sure that your contacts are kept up to date. And if you have underground tanks, making sure that if you have a certified operator change, that also needs to change on your registration form. So what needs to be registered? If you have over 1,100 gallons on site, it can be an above ground tank, an underground tank. They also include generator tanks in that overall capacity. So that's something to think about is, did you recently have a project that you installed generators that have fuel oil in them? At least one underground tank having a capacity of 110 gallons, that tank would have to be registered. And any used oil tank has to be registered. The exception is temporary tanks that are not on site for longer than 180 days do not need to be registered. But if it stays 181 days, you need to make sure that that gets registered. So the operator training. Class A operator, these are for underground tanks only. Your way to think about it is your Class A operator typically manages your resources and your personnel to receive and maintain the compliance of the code requirements. So that's typically a higher up level supervisor. They do have to take that online test to get their certification. The Class B operator typically is the field person who does operation maintenance and the record keeping with the underground storage tanks. So my guess is it's probably the majority of you that are on this call. And then the Class C operator, it typically controls or monitors the dispensing and they respond to spills. This is just documented training. The training is supposed to be conducted by an A/B operator. I know that as the BOCES safety person, I have assisted in giving these trainings. However, it's the A or B operator that sign off on that. Operators have to be authorized by DEC or take their test or have their training within 30 days after they've been designated. So don't wait. They're online tests. They are timed. And there is also such a thing as an A/B operator. One person is holding the certification for both. And there's a separate test for that. It's a combined test where you have more questions to ask. As-built drawings. So if you've had any modifications, changes, whether it be an above ground tank or an underground tank, do you have copies of your as-built drawings? Because that's one of the things that an inspector is going to ask to see. Even if you've given it to DEC before. So it appears like they are not very good at their records, that when they put them in the file, your field inspectors may not actually have them. So making sure you have that copy on site or can email it to them within 10 days of your inspection. So now let's talk about your physical assessments. So how often are you checking your tank top sumps? So checking your tank top sumps, are they free of water, no oil, and are they clean? And then what do you do about this condition that you see? What do you do when there's water in it? Are you using pig mats? Are you using absorbent material? Are you using a hand pump? Making sure you're avoiding using sparking equipment. I have had a couple of people say, well, I'll just use the HEPA vac to suck that out. You don't know what that contains. You don't know if it contains fuel oil. So the recommendation is to actually use a hand pump to try to get that material out. One of the newer things that they're starting to look at, I never had them do this until recently. They're actually opening up your dispensers at your fuel pumps. They're looking inside your dispenser cabinet. They're looking for fuel or leaks. They're looking under the cabinet to see if you have a containment sump or a pan, and that should also be clean and dry, which is always a challenge for us in this weather. So making sure that you're opening that up, checking it periodically, especially if you know that we've had snow or rain and your cabinet may not be weather tight. You want to make sure that you're prepared and you keep that cleaned out and dry.
Hey, Micki,
Yeah.
they make us do that once a month
Yes.
as part of our inspection. It is not, you can't just say, oh, I check it every once in a while.
No, it should be a minimum once a month. And when I get to the bottom of the presentation, I'll actually show you the requirements of when things are. But yeah, at least once a month, you need to open it up. But also thinking that if you've had heavy rain, if you've had snow, it may be more important to do it more frequently than that once a month. So it depends on your site and those things that you're seeing. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. And then once a month with your tanks, or even when you've had a delivery, you want to take a look at your fill bucket and your sumps. Are they clean? Are they dry? Are they labeled appropriately? Do they have tags on them? So also with your sump and your spill bucket, the tightness testing every 3 years. And that is a relatively new requirement. It started in 2016. Most of us had it done for the first time between 2016 and 2018. 2019. So if I did it in 2016, it should have been done again in 2019. So what we're really looking at is getting prepared to have the tightness testing done on our spill bucket and sump in 2024. So that's something to make sure, since it's a fairly new thing for us, making sure that that doesn't fall by the wayside. So any liquid in the spill bucket longer than 2 hours actually counts as a spill per DEC. So like I said, always make sure after you've had a delivery, you go out and you double check this, because you don't want to have it sitting longer there for 2 hours. And that's typically when we're going to get liquid in this, is after we've had a delivery. So if any of you still have steel tanks, making sure that your cathodic protection testing is being done on that annual basis for underground metal tanks. And that record retention for that is 3 years. So again, it's under the ground. It might be one of those things that's easy for us to forget. So making sure that we are actually keeping up on those. So the tank monitoring and the leak detection. So do you have interstitial space monitoring? If so, looking at that, there's 2 different types of monitoring for that. There's the manual. So if it's not hooked up to an electronic system, it is a weekly check. If it is hooked up to an electronic monitoring system, it's monthly. And when you do that monthly, making sure you're polling the sensors. It's not just your daily inventory check that you see. I know sometimes when I go in and I talk to people about this, they're like, we print this out every day. Well, you might be printing out your inventory control every day. It might be telling you if you have high levels, low levels every day, but are you actually pulling the sensors? So it typically is more than one push button. It's typically in the menu. So knowing your system and knowing where it's located in that menu is an important thing. If for any reason your electronic monitoring system goes down, you then revert automatically to manually checking that. So it goes from being that once a month electronic to that weekly manual. So thinking about our overfill alarms, looking at things like, so here's one of those daily manuals that you would pull. So it gives you your volume, gives you your quantities. But then I see that tank 1 has an overfill alarm. It also has a high product alarm. So again, being able to print off my system, being able to keep those records. And we'll talk about records retention also in a few. Your fill port tags. What is supposed to be on them? So when they first install your tanks, when it first goes in, when you first register it, a lot of times these are a metal stamped tag and they're fixed directly to your fill ports. Over time, they may become disconnected. They may get lost. So you are allowed to print out a tag yourself, laminate it and attach it to the fill port, but you want to make sure you have the right information on it. So what the fill port tag should have on it is your registration identification number. What is your tank's total capacity for design? What is your tank's working capacity? And what product is stored? So again, this is something you might have to keep up with if you have flipped your tanks. So if you went from gas to diesel or diesel to gas, which is what I'm seeing more often, is people are changing their diesel tanks over to a gasoline tank because they've got more gas buses now than they had in the past. So making sure that your fill port tags are actually accurate. So your above ground tanks, for those of you with the above ground tanks, in addition to your interstitial space monitoring, your electronic type monitoring, you also need to do a monthly visual monitoring. So it's filling out a piece of paper once a month that says, I checked for leaks because it's up on cradles, it's on stilts, it's in a concrete vault. So do I see any leaks? Do I have any corrosion? The labeling on the exterior of my tank. So an above ground tank, they want you to be able to look at it from a distance to be able to tell what is in it. So again, that would be required to have your overall tank capacity, so that's your design capacity, also your working capacity, and then they would also want the appropriate symbol for what is located in that tank. And then your overfill alarms. So you will have the overfill alarms on an above ground tank. The question is, on a monthly basis, are you going over and manually hitting the test button on that to make sure the alarm is working? Over time, they may not become as loud. Over time, the speaker may quit working. Summertime, you may actually get things like bees, wasps, hornets putting their nests right against the speaker so that you're not able to hear the tank. So if you have a spill for an above ground tank, that is one of the things that they will definitely check, especially if it was during a delivery, is checking to make sure that your overfill alarm worked so that the driver knew that the tank had filled. So fuel port color coding. So this color coding would be required for an underground tank. It would be required on your access ports, your tank lids, your plow lids, anything that you would lift to gain access to the tank. On your above ground tanks, they want to see these markings on the tank itself, plus at the fuel port. So making sure that you have the appropriate labeling. And over time, they fade. You can't tell what they are anymore. Is it a purple hexagon or does it look like just this big black square? So making sure that you have the correct one. So this one came right from the American Fuel Gas Association. So this is what DEC is going to look for and request. So here's all the record keeping. So we know that the physical walkthrough doesn't take a whole lot of time when they come to do an inspection. It's more of the paperwork that takes a little bit longer for them to look at. So they're going to look at operator training to make sure that you have done the operator training and you retain those records for as long as that person is the designated person plus 3 years. So if you had someone retire and you're updating your book, making sure that just because they retired doesn't mean you pull their certificate out. You have to keep that for an additional 3 years. So that might be something you didn't know. Your registration certificates, we've already talked about, they're good for 5 years. And you can then, from the date that it's issued, it's good for 5 years. You should keep a copy of it for during that whole time. Financial responsibility is during the life of the tank. So financial responsibility, meaning that you have appropriate insurance that's required by DEC Part 7 by 613, that if you have a spill, that you have the financial means to be able to clean up that spill. Closure reports, forwarding the copies of the permanent closures to DEC within 30 days after the tank has been closed. And we have to keep closeout reports for at least 3 years. They do recommend that you keep it as a permanent record. So if somebody says, what happened to that tank that was here 10 years ago, you can say, oh yeah, we closed that 6 years ago and here's the records for it. Although not required to for longer than 3 years. The site assessments, forwarding copies to the DEC within 90 days after your closure, keeping originals at least 3 years. Again, they recommend that those be permanent. So your daily inventory monitoring, those little slips of paper that come out of your automatic tank gauging systems, or if you're using an electronic system, they recommend that you're keeping those records for 3 years. Any reconciliations for your 10-day reconciliation, again, keeping those for 3 years. And that's one of the ways that they're going to have you prove statistically that you don't have leaks. Your leak detection equipment, your monthly operability checks, keeping those for 3 years. My weekly monitoring for 3 years. Any repairs that you've had done to your system, any leak detection equipment that you've had repaired, keeping those repair records for at least 3 years. Line tightness testing until the next test is conducted. And again, that will depend on what type of tank you have, whether you have a category 1, a category 2, or a category 3, depends on how often those are required. Your weekly pipe testing, your weekly monitoring for pipe leak detection for 3 years, your monthly operability checking for 3 years. The annual line leak detection, if those are required for your tanks, for 3 years. So 3 years seems to be their big go-to number. Line leak detections 3 years after your repairs, your cathodic protection, your 60-day rectifier readings for 3 years, and annual cathodic protection for 3 years. Spill reports, anytime that you've had to call and report a spill or a suspected spill, or DEC is there and doing their inspection and they're telling you to call in a spill, you have to keep that record for 3 years. Your tightness testing, again, for 3 years. Frequency, thinking for compatibilities, there's no records that are required for compatibility testing. Installation records, you keep the as-built drawings we are supposed to have available to us for the life of that tank. Line inspections every 5 years, and repairs again for the life of that tank. Inventory monitoring, how often do we do these things? So doing our daily for above ground tanks, or a daily monitoring for my tanks, water checking for water on a daily basis, measure my dispensing fuel daily, measure of the amount of fuel delivered. We check that daily, reconciling our fuel inventories every 10 days, checking for variances every 10 days, checking for the reoccurring accumulation of water every 10 days. So my tank leak detection, it's going to be a weekly monitoring, and then my tank tightness is yearly.
Hey, Micki,
Yeah.
that 10-day,
Yep.
they told me because I don't sell it, I don't have to do the 10-day reconciliation. I got
Right. They're not actually looking for it anymore. It's not a requirement for us. And that's a new change. Sorry, I should have put that in there. So for the new changes, they're not actually looking for us to have available to them that 10-day, but they will ask, are you doing anything to double check your leak detection? So if you can show you're doing that interstitial space monitoring, typically they won't look for those 10 days. If you've all of us for some reason not done a 10-day, not done an interstitial space monitoring, they're going to look for some kind of a record to prove that you're not leaking. Sometimes it also depends on who my inspector is. I've got one inspector up north that still is looking for the 10-day, even though it's not a requirement. And his response was, well, how do you know whether you're not leaking? And then we went into the whole, well, we're checking the interstitial space. So your tank leak detection systems, making sure that we're checking those. Our line leak detection, our piping, that we're doing those. Are required to do, so depending on the type of piping you have, so you do have some suction piping out there that is exempt from the line tightness testing every 3 years. So it's also important to know your systems. And then if I have steel tanks, things like my impressed current, my rectifier inspection every 60 days, and then doing my cathodic testing on an annual basis, or within 6 months of the installation, and then annually. Asking me a lot of questions about spill plans lately. So, do we have a plan of how to address spills? Has your Class C operator been trained on dealing with spills? Do you have a spill kit available? This becomes really important, and they get really curious if other people are fueling at your facility. So I know some of us have agreements with municipalities that they're coming over and they're fueling. Some of them are only coming while we're there. Some of them, they're allowed to come regardless of if we're present or not to fill. So do they have access to spill required equipment if there's nobody there on site who can get them into the garage to get them things like spill pads, speedy dry? So making sure that we've checked our containers. Are the materials still there, or have they been used up? And then do we even have them in a spot where people can access them?
Our inspector told me that if I'm fueling the municipalities,
Yep.
I do have to do my 10-day,
Yep.
and I got to have it sealed by weights and measures.
Yeah, and so that's something that they're now starting to look at. They've never looked at it in the past of who else besides you is using your fuel island. So that's something to keep track of. So another thing that they're asking about spills is, do you have a spill prevention, control, and countermeasure plan? This may or may not apply to you. This is a requirement if for above ground tanks. So if you have 1,320 gallons above ground, you need to have a spill prevention, control, and countermeasure plan. If you have a combination of up to 42,000 gallons on your property, you need to have a spill prevention plan. This plan gets updated every 3 years. And so I've put that link right there. So if you needed to figure out, does this apply to me? You can click right on that link that will take you to that spill prevention, control, and countermeasure plan requirement. One other thing with the spill prevention, control, and countermeasure requirement is if you have less than 1,100 gallons on site, you can less than 10,000 gallons, on site, you can self-certify it. If you have more than 10,000 gallons on site, this actually involves, the initial plan would involve having an engineer assist you with this plan. Because one of the other things that they look at is, do you have the potential to release into groundwater, streams, or into a waterway? All of us have drum storage. Typically, your 55-gallon drums do not count towards your bulk petroleum storage for your registration, but they have to be considered as part of your spill plan. So, do you have any containment for drum storage? And is it monitored? So, one of the questions that they've posed to me recently is, well, what do you do if a 55-gallon drum cracks and leaks? Do you have a plan for it? And remembering that it could also count as a spill to DEC. So if you do not have things like a containment around your 55-gallon drum storage, or you do not have a room built for your 55-gallon drum storage, I encourage you to think about having things like spill pallets to have your drums on, so that if something was to happen and a drum was to leak, at least that waste is contained. It'll save you a lot of issues of having to have a spill reported to DEC. Because what has to be reported to DEC? Any product found where it should not be is considered a spill to DEC. They don't care if you call it a spill or if you call it a leak. Both of those for them count. So a spill must be reported unless all of these following things are true. A spill is less than 5 gallons in total volume, and it is contained and under control, and it has not reached or will not reach the state's waterways, including groundwater or any land. And it is cleaned up within 2 hours after discovery. This 2 hours after discovery is the one that seems to be tripping the most of us up. So if you don't know how long something has been there, when they come to do an inspection, they're going to make you call it in as a spill. I had a situation where a driver overfilled their bus. They put down speedy dry, and then they got on their bus and they drove away. Unfortunately, somebody from DEC happened to drive by this bus garage and saw the speedy dry down early in the morning. When that same DEC inspector drove by later that afternoon and saw that speedy dry was still down, they pulled in and they asked the head mechanic on duty, "Hey, I see you've got some speedy dry down by your pumps. What happened?" He says, "Oh, one of the drivers overfilled this morning." He says, "Oh, this morning?" "Yeah." He says, you do know you're supposed to clean up the medium as well within 2 hours. And unfortunately, this mechanic's response was, "Yeah, but it's going to rain tomorrow and it's going to wash it all away." Needless to say, that opened up a can of worms, and we had to do some additional training, and the district did receive a violation for not having a spill cleaned up within 2 hours. So part of the NOV that we received stating that the spill had not been cleaned up within 2 hours, what we had to prove is that we had corrected our situation and given our employees, including our bus drivers, training on alerting staff if they have overfilled the bus and they've put down speedy dry. So making sure that they know that that also counts as a spill that has to be cleaned up within 2 hours. I don't know if anybody else has ever had that situation occur to them. How do I call it in? So must report spills to DEC within 2 hours of a discovery at the spill hotline. You'll be given a spill report number. When an inspector comes on site for an inspection, they're going to have pulled your records to see if you have had any spills called in, and they will close them if they can see that they've been rectified when they come to do their inspection. Just a little reminder about chemical bulk storage. Tanks larger than 185 gallons must be registered as part of the chemical bulk storage program through DEC. So if you have what I typically see is bulk antifreeze. So if you have a bulk tank with greater than 185 gallons of antifreeze, is that registered as a chemical with DEC? Because we've seen that missed and people have gotten in trouble for that. One of my most recent inspections, one of the questions they've never asked about before was oil water separators. So after the recent inspection, the inspector themselves never asked the question about the oil water separator while he was on site. Instead, the district received a letter inquiring about the oil water separator in the bus garage. So we had no floor drain records, so we had to bring out a company with a camera and put it into the pipe to determine where it actually drained to. So we determined that it went to the municipal sewer. Had it not gone into the municipal sewer, we would have needed to find the outfall and start the process for a state pollution discharge elimination system permit, or a SPEDIES permit. So depending on where you discharge to, would require if you needed that SPEDIES permit. And then with the SPEDIES permit, sometimes based on your gallonage that you're discharging, you may also then have to do sampling. So you may have to do sampling at the outfall on a monthly basis to show what you're actually discharging. And again, that's based on your quantity of what you discharge. So one of the things that I also did for you guys is resources. Where did I get all of this information from, so that you can go back and not only look at the presentation, but you can also have links of where this document all come from. So Tank IQ is a great resource for tank operators. It's the manual that somebody will use when they take that AB operator's test, that open book test. But it's also a great resource for people to try to get familiar with your systems. They also have the bulk storage guidance documents that are put out by DEC. I have a link there to the actual reg for part 613. I also put a copy of the New York State DEC Petroleum Bulk Storage Inspection Form. So this is the form that an inspector from DEC will actually fill out. Gives you a chance to actually look at it and preview it before somebody comes on site. What are the actual things that's the inspector looking for at that time? And then I also found a copy of the DEC Inspector's Handbook. So it gives the inspector guidance documents of how they conduct an inspection. So again, it's another tool in our toolbox that we can use to help us get better prepared for an inspection. And that is all that I have. Do you guys have questions or war stories or things that other people need to be aware of, concerned about when they have an inspection?
Yeah, I got one thing they hit us on. We have emergency diesel generators, and each one of them has a tank on them.
Yep.
And they have to be treated as an above ground storage tank with monthly inspection documentation to show them. So if you have
anything greater than 110 gallons, George. Yep.
What kind of documentation are they looking for on the oil water separator?
So for that oil water separator, they're looking for how is it maintained? So do you have it, who cleans it out? How often do you have to clean it out? And that would depend on your usage. But one of the other things, so they're looking to see, what do you do with the sludge when you do clean out your drains? Documentation of how you're doing disposal, or have you done a T-clip on it? And so it's a toxic characteristic leaching property test to figure out what is in the oil water separator. Sometimes when they do one of those T-clips, they'll tell you that it's a non-hazardous waste. Sometimes it is a hazardous waste, but they want documentation that you've had that testing done to show your oil water separator is holding, where your water is actually draining to. So does it drain to the municipal sewer system, or do you need one of those speedies permits? So that's the documentation that they were looking for regarding that oil water separator. Kenny, you're muted.
Thank you. And by the way, we just renewed our permit, and they did send me an email back in September. It was due in November, and they did send me an update that I was due to renew all my documentation here. They have a different way of paying now. Also, you have to establish account with the DEC, and they want their money right away. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, and so one of the questions that I've got out there that they've not answered yet is that's a little bit more challenging for schools. It's pretty easy for a private entity to renew that way. More difficult for us with the purchase ordering system. So I'm waiting to get some response from them to see how that is going to be handled from like municipalities who do everything with a purchase order.
I believe we paid by credit card after we cut a purchase order.
Okay. Any other questions, guys? Well, I hope this was helpful for you guys. I know that I've been doing this for a number of years, and it always seems to, change sometimes depending on who your inspector is of what they're looking for. So, and depending on what region you're in sometimes as well.
Hey, Micki, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
Just one quick question. We recently did have DEC come in November, and is there a standardized 30-day inspection form for both underground and above ground storage? We've made our own, but is there one that DEC provides?
There's not anything that they provide. So the regulation says what it must include, but it doesn't say here's the form you have to use.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, does anybody have any other questions for Micki? If you think of any, or you have anything else that you need clarification on, or you would just like to have another presentation by Micki, please let me know, and we can make this happen. We want to keep everybody talking and everybody bouncing the ideas off each other. Go ahead, Micki.
Yeah, so just remember that if you do have BOCES, Health Safety Risk Management, we can also help you with your records review. We can help you do pre-inspections. We can help you get prepared just in case you do, think that you hear that their inspectors are in the neighborhood, because they often do that. They'll often bounce from school district to school district and try to hit multiple in one day. And, we're there for a resource, and we are there to assist you with your training as well.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Yeah. All right. Well, first of all, thank you, Micki, for your presentation. I'm sure everybody got an awful lot of information out of it, and I'm sure more questions will come up, so I will definitely be in touch with you. Our next meeting will be held on January 17th. Elizabeth Fox is the Director of Auxiliary Services at Johnson City School District. Between her job there and her previous job at another school district, she has some experience operating an electric fleet, and she was going to present to us on just the issues that she came across, and hopefully that's will be a little helpful for all of us as we venture into it. As of now, I'm planning on a 2-part presentation on after treatments, but we have to make sure that that's a go yet, so I won't elaborate on that until we're definitely positive, and I will send everybody an email on that. But that would be February 14th and March 13th. And other than that, does anybody have anything to add to today's meeting? All right, not seeing anything. I'm going to go ahead and close the meeting, and we will see you guys next month.